Camouflage. That's when you read Camus, but you don't want anyone to know that you're doing it.
The claustrophobic corridors of a chaotic film set bear witness to a vicious power struggle. The film is about medieval witch burnings. Proceedings are haunted by the ghosts of auteurs past, namely Godard, Dreyer, Fassbinder. But the absence of competence or cooperation on this film set renders these illusions shallow. A young wannabe auteur from LA harangues a flustered Charlotte Gainsbourg. Aussie up-and-comer Abby Lee protests her unexpected toplessness, not in the contract. A sadistic DP goes rogue amidst both a power outage and a power vacuum. The low-frequency hum and sustained multichromatic flicker typical of this film's director serve to stir up any remaining cortisol. This is Gaspar Noé's 2019 medium-length making-of from hell, Lux Aeterna. And this is MoobTube. Owen, we've come to blows on Noé before. Is this sincere soul-searching from a solid cineast, or merely strobe-lit self-abuse?
Yeah, we did come to blows over Noé on episode 4 of this podcast.
Not those kind of blows.
Not those kind of blows, actually. Yeah, I was left kind of flaccid ultimately by love when we came around to it the first time. And my exposure to Noé generally has been... I think he cares a lot about cinema. Like I think he's got an auteur's vision. I think he is really sincere about the films he makes, which I think is always like a tick in his column. But as for Lux Aeterna, I really liked it. I'm putting my cards right on the table there, but it's a weird little thing. Because I tried not to do too much digging beforehand. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do a short project. And he's done quite a few short films and kind of in between bigger projects, he's worked quite a lot with shorts. And what I'd read was that, this is about witchcraft, and I was like, cool, that's interesting. And surprising for someone who's like, normally his other films have been, about modern sexuality in Paris, or about kind of like acid, basically, about kind of trips and things like that, and parties. It's DMT. It's like he's a very kind of like bohem, director in the now. It's like, okay, this is like a historic thing. I mean, ultimately, it's not a historic.
Yeah,
I thought it would be. I thought because like the opening couple of scenes where he reenacts like I believe it's a reference to Huxon, like Benjamin Christensen's like 1922. 1922, maybe 1920 something, Swedish silent film about witchcraft. It's called The Witch, so Huxon. And I think it's referencing that. I was like, oh, cool. This is like a updated kind of, because that film is all about kind of, it's like an interpretation of the Malleus Maleficarum and the Spanish Inquisition and torture, and it's kind of a bit of a drama and a bit of a documentary about witch trials in the kind of 15th, 16th, 17th centuries, and it's very cool. I thought, well, it's going to be like that, because he recreates all these scenes of torture, which are done in such a way that they look really compellingly real. There's bits of, quite
a lot of machinery
and torture devices, and it's really well done. I was like, this is sick, because I'm a pervert.
Has a very Dreyer feel, and then Dreyer is then referenced.
Yeah, totally. But then you get those intertitles where it's suddenly it's Noé, and it's like and he drops in Dostoevsky about fit. It's about, actually, I think I just realised it's about a fit, isn't it? It's about a epileptic fit or something. And the visions
did Dostoevsky actually say that, where he says people who have epilepsy have a real good time just before it gets bad?
He said a lot of shit. Really not a Dostoevsky fan, but anyway. And he drops that, and he drops some quotes by Dreyer, and he drops some quotes about like about the kind of messianic and Manichaean mission of the filmmaker. Like, the filmmaker is creating art, and art is like an ethical thing. But you've literally just watched this film.
Yeah, I have.
You're hot off the press. So what's your take now you're right off the boat?
It felt very much like a COVID-19 film, not in relationship to the pandemic, but in relationship to that sort of taking stock, self-reflexive turn. I'm not ignorant to the fact that it was made well before COVID-19. It was like released it was premiered at a festival in May 2019, and
they don't exist anymore, festivals.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like Mubi, basically. I was reading Sight and Sound recently, and it's like at the end of every review it says available on Mubi or available on Netflix. And then there are really angry letters in the letters page where people are saying, "Why are you reviewing TV? I thought this was Britain's foremost film magazine." You know, and there's like someone who's being really woke about the Steve McQueen Small Axe the thing, saying, "Oh, it's really profound." But I must say, some of these works are really not worthy of McQueen's cinematic oeuvre at all. They don't deserve to be reviewed
because it's on telly.
And it's like, you guys, let go. You don't realise that like this categorization is no longer important. Like everything is just streaming.
It's been meaningless for like 30 years, or at least 20 years since HBO, at least in a bigger sense. But these are like South Bank cineast people, and
I'm going on a tangent anyway. I'm pouring people off.
No, you're going on a tangent. But
I do kind of care. I do care about cinema as I think that TV shows are just becoming more cinematic, and the length of films is varying, and
there's
cool.
a correlation between them now. They overlap.
That's fine. I do think cinema is a thing. I think that things can be televisual and theatrical, and that's different from cinema. But I don't really care what it's on. I think in terms of output, I'm not like. I wouldn't draw that distinction based on what you're watching the thing on. I would draw that distinction based on the work itself.
Yeah.
By the by, I liked Lux Aeterna. It had this weird sort of like not really making a proper film, sort of stepping back and doing a kind of reflective thing to it. So I kind of reviewed it in my mind. I appraised it in a different way to if it was like. That's not to do with its length. I think that's to do with some sort of intermission feeling to it. Like the first scene is just this really long improvised dialogue scene between Beatrice Dahl and Charlotte Gainsbourg, where they talk
really
about...
good. Actually, that bit of improvisation is really...
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like locker room talk, but for like women in cinema.
It is, but for women actors, and they're talking about like there's a really good moment where because we've just seen a scene where a woman has been burned at the stake in a kind of recreation of a kind of silent film. You know, it's got the energy of Joan of Arc.
Drea.
About it, Drea. Yeah, and again, I think it's consciously surfacing the reference to Drea and Christensen and whatever. And then she's like, "Have you ever been burnt?" And for a moment, it kind of holds the possibility that this is some sort of like fantasy thing, or they're really witches, or there's something here, and it's kind of he's creatively playing off the idea that they might be witches and might have survived a burning. But obviously, they're talking about acting roles. But the line between what is being burnt as a fictional acting practice, you know, like a bit of your job for the day, you know, today I was burnt at work, and the kind of the real of real witchcraft burnings is kind of blurred, and that becomes increasingly important throughout this kind of 50-minute film, because the fictional and the non-fictional are kind of allowed to contaminate each other, but it's kind of set up quite nicely because you think that for a minute. And it is, it's a really nice kind of improvised bit of dialogue. And of course it's Charlotte Gainsbourg.
Who's kind of the queen of art house, like Euro exploitation, isn't she? Like modern.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised when I remembered that she hasn't actually been in any Gaspar Noé films. I just sort of felt...
No, she seems like an obvious Gaspar Noé heroine.
Because of all the von Trier stuff. But I also want to make very clear I don't see Trier and Noé the same. You know, I think that Noé has got much more integrity than von Trier.
100%. That's what I was saying.
I'm glad you agree with me. That's the sort of thing that well, that's like one of the reasons we do the podcast is because we agree on things like that. They're quite hard to foundational
articulate. Like the foundational, you know, when people say it's like porn, it's like hard to define, but you know, when you see it, that's our view on cinema. It's like,
but von Trier is just kind of nihilistic, and yeah, you're absolutely right when you say at the top of the show, like that like that, you know, like with Noé, that there's this love and dedication towards cinema always that carries you through, I think. Whereas with Von Trier, there's a sort of, it's like it just, to me, always with Von Trier just feels like an indulgence, and it feels gratuitous.
Yeah.
I watched Irreversible last night. Have you seen Irreversible?
I haven't, no.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, right. God.
No. That's why I was kind of, I just why I didn't get back to you.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to seem lesser in your eyes.
No, of course. Well, there's no danger of that. So I'm gonna do a little filmography of Gaspar Noé, because I care about Gaspar Noé. I Stand Alone was his debut film. It's kind of a bleak, but a bleak story of like an abattoir worker who fucks his daughter, and it has this sort of it initiates this immersive, hardcore aesthetic that defines the rest of Noé's work. He then takes that immersive, hardcore aesthetic to its logical conclusion in Irreversible, which is, as the title implies, told in reverse chronology, more or less following the format of Memento, by what's his chops, Chris Nolan, and it tells the story of a kind of guy whose girlfriend is brutally raped and assaulted on a subway, and his attempts to get revenge. But you see the acts of violence and revenge first because of the reverse chronology, and then as you move your way backwards, you see the assault, and then as you move your way further backwards, you see their relationship. And that reverse chronology is quite graceful and illuminating in terms of the kind of moral core of the film, because the acts of violent vengeance are without context and can be sort of seen for what they are, rather than with the motivation they might have attached to them, having seen the brutal violence they're attempting to avenge. The central and most infamous scene in Irreversible of the really horrifically violent rape and assault is 10 minutes long. It's one take, which is in stark contrast to the rougey, floaty Steadicam of the rest of the film, and most of Noé's work is just one long still take, and it's pretty hard to watch. But yeah, the film sort of gets happier and more hopeful as it goes back in time. Ironically. What is there to say about his next film, Enter the Void, which is like 2.5 hours, and it's set in Japan, and it's almost all at night, and it's probably my favorite film by Gaspar Noé. It evokes this slightly incestuous relationship between this brother and sister whose parents were killed in an accident, and the brother dies at the hands of police when his flat is being raided, and it sort of follows these ideas of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and DMT, and there's lots of scenes in strip clubs because his sister, played by Paz Dula Huerta, is a stripper. Then he made Love, which we've reviewed on this podcast already. Very briefly, it was 3D. It was kind of noted for its use of unsimulated sex. It's almost all of the film is a sex scene. It's kind of a story of relationship and told through sex scenes. Then he did Climax, which is a film about someone spiking the punch bowl at a dance rehearsal, and everything goes a bit Pete Tong.
Again, the idea of substances and kind of transformational states of mind, right?
Yeah, and then he makes Lux Aeterna, which we're reviewing now.
Yeah. Which is there's like, it's weird how there are themes for him. And
he's great at theme. You give him that.
He's really obsessed.
He's good at theme.
He's good at theme. He's good at theme, and he's good at colour, and he's good at sincerity. All his films are very deeply sincere, and all have the element of complete contrivedness, and also a kind of looseness, as if they're improvised. He does that really well. I think one of the things I find really interesting about him is the reoccurrence of certain things like sex, obviously, or the the relationship between kind of cinema and sex, and gaze and sex, and also slaughterhouses and butchery, which is
Fassbinderian.
Very Fassbinderian, but also Georges Franju, you know.
I haven't seen his work.
Like Eyes Without Face, but that's not really about butcheries, but Le Sang des Bêtes, like The Blood of the Beasts, like his film about, literally his film about an abattoir, which I feel it's kind of irrelevant to this, but I just feel like, because Franju was so Dreyerian, and obviously Noé there's this kind of line of like slightly outsidery French and Belgian directors. You know, Noé is not the disciple of you know, Jean-Luc Godard or, you know, Truffaut or anyone. He's like this other subterranean kind of nest of French directors that he's more in line with. You know, this kind of, well, this like body, this kind of cinema.
And Catherine Breillat as well, that sort of turn of the century fleshy cinema that Claire Denis kind of dallianced with briefly.
But yeah, you know, I think it's a very disturbing cinema, and I think so with Carnet and I Stand Alone, like his only films that is an obsession with kind of characters who are involved in animal butchery, and like, so there's the proximity of sex, violence, and power is all there in his films. And I think until now he hasn't really directly talked about that in the context of cinema directly, but it's kind of obvious, because although cinema is that, isn't it? You know, people often say in a Sontagian sense that, like, you know, the lens is violence, so he's kind of taking that as a literal thing and making a film where it's kind of problematizing the lens. Whether or not he's successful at doing that is something we can talk about, because obviously it's one thing to say I'm making a film where I'm going to problematize and unpack the male like filmmaker's lens and gaze, and what that does to women and what it does to female bodies. And it's another thing to actually do a film that doesn't exploit them in the process, but does produce a meaningful outcome and does critically pick that relationship apart. Let's kind of fast forward a bit. The film is all focused on this one scene on this failed shoot where 3 women are going to be burned at the stake in a very kind of like hypnotic club-like scene. Basically, it's kind of very gory and slashery and sexploitation style. Everything's fucking going wrong. Eventually, during the shoot, the lighting fucks up, and we're subjected to about 10 or 15 minutes of intense strobing and ear-piercing noise. And nobody pulls the women down off these stakes, so the actors. Nobody's able to stop the light, the noise. It's chaos. And for that moment, Noé focuses his camera on the 3 women, but eventually just on Charlotte Gainsbourg, as she writhes, and the director who's behind the camera, who until this point, the actual director, not the DP, who's been kind of dominating until this point, the actual director, who makes a very good point. He says, like, I began with Jean-Luc. You know, he feels emasculated, and this is his moment, and he keeps the camera trained on Charlotte Gainsbourg, and he zooms in and he's like, yes Charlotte, more, because she's writhing in a real way, as if she's really being burned, which is what I'm saying about this kind of loop earlier, where the relationship between a real and a fictional burning kind of fully crosses over, because Charlotte Gainsbourg is literally kind of being burned under the gaze of the camera, and the director, you know, any other film set, you know, this is fucking a kind of abuse in a way. You know, nobody helps her down off this thing. She's still tethered to it and basically having a fucking epileptic fit on this pole. And it's quite insane, because we're subjected to it as well. You know, obviously that he doesn't let us look away. That scene lasts like 12 minutes or something, and speeds up, and it's kind of like fucking like going on a sped up DMT vision quest. But he does that, but actually I feel like ultimately he gets a very kind of sick film out of it. The footage at the end, because we were thinking, is like, he's right, this is great footage. Subjecting these women to this is great, and Charlotte Gainsbourg is really sexed up, and, you know, sort of in this kind of sexy dress, and so are the actresses, you know, sort of these flimsy ahistorical dresses, and it's like, well, you've kind of made your point that the male lens can exploit women in its patriarchal effort to do art and film, but you've also produced at the same time, you've had your cake and eaten it, because you have produced a very cool exploitative film.
He's basically saying it's worth it.
Yeah, he's kind of
basically saying like, yeah, you have fun with your Me Too thing, but basically this machine still works.
yeah, exactly.
Like aesthetically, he's not obviously advocating abuse, but he's sort of saying like the convent. I mean, he is like, in a way, like he's kind of. This podcast has a kind of maybe an overly protective relationship over Gaspar Noé, because he's unashamedly male gaze. I talked when we reviewed Love about how like he does for me what like Chantal Akerman does for like introverted lesbians. Like Gaspar Noé is like is this sort of like wannabe auteur, horny, very like obsessed with sensation, desperate to push the to get closer and to get more immersed and to push boundaries formally. And it's with a sincerity. I mean, the character in Love is the guy Murphy. I mean,
who reappears in Lux Aeterna.
Yeah, playing. Yeah. I mean, he's a different character, but he's playing the same role of this kind of Kubrick stan who thinks that he could one day be the next big person in a chapter.
Because this is like film. Murphy. You could believe this is the same universe, and Murphy's all grown up because he's got a moustache here, and he's now making his debut film. Whereas in Love, he is in film school still.
Yeah. Yeah, he loves. Noé loves a little bit of character. Like in Irreversible, there's the first scene features the butcher from I Stand Alone.
Who is also in Carnet.
Is he? I haven't seen Carnet.
That's good. Sorry, it's just a kind of lower budget, kind of short version of like a test for litmus test for I Stand Alone.
Oh really? Okay.
Yeah, it's good. But yeah, Murphy is also him. Murphy is also Gaspar Noé, and obviously Gaspar Noé is in Love as an older, kind of slightly predatory guy. And he's an odd little guy. He's kind of bald, slaphead.
Yeah, he always casts himself as a sort of defense against accusation. I really I find that really hilarious. Like there's I was on the Wikipedia page for Irreversible, which is something that one would want to do after watching a film like that, just to get a bit of like distance. Film critic David Edelstein argues that Irreversible might be the most homophobic movie ever made. I clicked on David Edelstein, and it says he lives in Brooklyn, New York, with his wife and 2 daughters. So what claim he has to decide what the most homophobic film ever made might be disputable.
Well, Gaspar Noé made a film called Sodomites, so he can't be homophobic.
Noé's depiction of gay criminal Latenia inexplicably raping the female lead Alex remains the film's most controversial image. In his defense, Noé has stated, "I'm not homophobic. I also appear in Irreversible masturbating at the gay club as a means of showing that I don't feel superior to gays." I kind of love that.
I love that. I love Gaspar Noé.
He's like, I'm literally having a wank in a gay club, so I'm not.
He's misunderstood.
I am with the gays.
Yeah, I'm with the literal gays with the Z. He's got a real sense of like getting ahead of the story. He's trying to get the butterfly on the pin. In order to pin the butterfly so people can appreciate it, you need to kill it, and you need to violently pin its abdomen to a board. What he's saying is that in order to examine really up close what life is, you need it to be real, and you need it to be intense, and it needs to be, really need to commit to it. Because you think about, so in bit of an aside, but so his film I just mentioned, Sodomites, which is a short film from 1988. I just went on the Wikipedia for it because I want to remember what I remember about this film. So the cast is, the 4 characters are a spectator, the master, the Sodoma, and the rectal beast. But again, it's about it's another film about includes rape, and the quote that they've used in an article talking about it in The Guardian is the rape had to be disgusting to be useful.
Well, speaking of useful, the film is a hardcore safe sex promo that was made for French television in late 90s. So French television wanted to make a promo for safe sex. And they got Gaspar Noé, admittedly before he'd made all of his films, but like they got Gaspar Noé to make...
That says a lot about French
That's
society,
pretty lit.
Isn't it? That's pretty
I'm starting to like the French again.
I love the French, man. We go off them sometimes, but I'm based on this exceptional bit of it's like getting fucking like, I don't know, I can't even, like Chris Morris to make like a public information film about like disinformation or something.
About fake news. He probably would do that in a really earnest way now, wouldn't he?
Yeah. I mean, the NHS did get no, that's not even the same, but they got like the crew behind Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared to do some public health films, which was kind of...
I don't know what that is.
It's not even comparable, but...
They should get Keith... It would be comparable to Keith Richards doing a film for the NHS. No, that's not fair on Noé. Like, obviously, Gaspar Noé is, like, sex positive, and he's
super sex positive. His films aren't there. He said the word useful is useful there, because he's saying, you know, often in films, there's an unnecessary sex is used as it has no explanation. I feel it does warrant an explanation in the film, as part of characterization or whatever. And I feel with Noé, he wants scenes of sex with a positive or negative, rape or pleasure, to be useful, and he wants emotions to be useful, arguments to be useful. You could take love, the argument where Murphy's continually banging on her door, and she's just calling him like a cunt, or I hate you, and it goes on for a really, really long time. And it's agonizingly long, and it's because of that, it becomes really real, and it kind of extreme argument becomes really... He's really good at these long takes, and you feel them more. And it's the same with the end of Lux Aeterna, because you feel Charlotte Gainsbourg's discomfort on this cross, as you would call it, or pole, because you're seeing the light as well. You feel the director's joy, because you're realizing that this is actually a better shot, a better scene. Like, her discomfort is making good cinema. It's better, it's more real. Her
acting gets really good.
It gets really good. Whereas before, when the shoot starts, when it's just the normal kind of flames behind them, and it's all very tawdry, I think, intentionally. It's all very boring and shit. It's like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is awful. And then once this...
It's a love letter to cinema, basically.
Yeah, it 100% is. And he's saying cinema comes through discomfort. This is almost like a manifesto for Noé. And the flashing light, that's what Noé said. It's cinema is light at 24 frames a second, 24, 26.
That's a bit of a pretentious thing to say, but I take your point. Can I go on a digression about form and content?
Please do.
So this morning I was listening to Come Town, as I sometimes do. As listeners of this podcast may notice, that there is like a few dribbling drops of influence from other dirtbag podcasts from across the pond. And I was listening their latest episode. They were doing this kind of spoof of Hannah Gadsby, the Australian stand-up comic, who...
what did she do?
She did this stand-up comedy Netflix special called Nanette.
Yeah, I know. It's the one that was the comedy without any jokes.
Yeah, so she basically
fucking sort of... What's the point?
So she went up on stage and said, like, she did a few jokes of sort of playing on like being a lesbian and stuff, and then she was like, well, basically this, I feel a bit uncomfortable about stand-up because it's quite a as a format, when you're like being humble, if you're from a marginalized group, it's not humility, it's humiliation, and I don't want to humiliate myself in a way that, like, she's basically saying like the form of stand-up is actually like not compatible with her creative aims. She sort of said, I'm not sure if I want to continue stand-up, and then that stand-up set did really well, and so she came back and did like a normal stand-up special.
So the format was completely appropriate then.
Yeah, and then so the Come Town guys did a spoof. It was mainly Nick Mullen. It always is mainly Nick Mullen.
Yeah.
Did this kind of this bit where he was like, he was like doing, just basically saying really racist, politically incorrect things in a Hannah Gadsby accent. Over in Australia we have these Aboriginal people, they're doing their didgeridoo. What the fuck is that? Like, just kind of going in on this, like, doing and the purpose, he explains it afterwards when Adam tries to join in and it kind of fails. Like, the purpose is to do a version of Hannah Gadsby that would offend people who like Hannah Gadsby, in order to convey to people who like Hannah Gadsby what it's like for them, people who find Hannah Gadsby to be rubbish, or offensive in some way. Anyway, that's a bit of a detour. Point being,
it's a huge detour, but go on. I'll allow it. I will allow this.
Point being, Hannah Gadsby is attempting to do stand-up without doing stand-up, because there's like an accusation against the medium, saying this medium has within it certain precepts and principles,
and this is a way of getting ahead of it without really diffusing the bomb. Exactly.
And a lot of people, I think, talk about, in this kind of transitional moment with cinema, you get a lot of women directors are often asked to kind of articulate their practice as distinct from the male-dominated history of cinema, which is fascinating and valuable, and, you know, I mean that very sincerely. What Gaspar Noé, I think, is saying with this film is that this element of like voyeurism and like sadism or suffering or discomfort and is like an integral or one of the great magical, you know, one of the great sort of shining diamonds of that work. You know, like, now we have intimacy directors and stuff. Like, you get like some middle-aged woman to come on set and, like, whenever there's any nudity, and kind of like do the red tape and the health and safety, and, you know,
they used to be called MILFs, but they had to rename them to something else. When you get a middle-aged woman coming into MILFs.
Oh my god!
When you pay for middle-aged women to come into your film set, that's generally what it's called. No, I'm being disingenuous, but I agree.
It's seasons in Constellation.
I mean, no. He's. I'm going to tell you a really deranged story, but
it is a cultural thing. The film is part of the kind of cinematic culture, I believe, and I think it
totally is, and it's very consciously doing that, because he is painting a very ambiguous situation where lots of men want something. So it could not be more possible that there is men who want something, men who overstep their boundaries. Let's list them. There is the general sense of the older female woman actress who is kind of actually the boss of the film, even though she's in the film, and she's actually the only
one. An exec producer or something? I didn't quite get what her role was.
She's not. She's just an actor in the film, but she takes on the role of like the director and the DP and everyone, because the men are all kind of a bit useless and floundering.
There's a huge power vacuum. Yeah,
a huge power vacuum in it, and she fills the power vacuum, and they resist it and they fight it because she emasculates them, even though she's kind of taking charge, and they fight that. There's a young Australian actress who is. She has no idea what's going on because everyone's speaking French and she doesn't seem to have a handler or any help there, and she's obviously very distressed. One of the executive producers has asked a young man to film various women in the set, and he films her when she's getting undressed, and it's just really invasive. So there's a journalist who keeps bugging the women because he wants to interview them, and he's like, tell me if I'm being too much, tell me if I'm overstepping the mark, but he's constantly hounding them when they're obviously very stressed and trying to work. There is Murphy, who is trying to get Charlotte Gainsbourg and another actress, completely like a vulture, to be in his project. All these men are making demands of them. So
when he's finally been rejected by her, he kind of he sort of almost places a curse on her by saying, "Oh, you know, you're gonna, you know, she's going to be spent and chucked on the scrap heap while I'm at Cannes lording it up."
And there's an element of truth to that, right? Because there's a truth to that, which is kind of like, you know, we know the narrative, we know sort of Charlotte Gainsbourg is fighting an uphill battle, and. Yeah, so there's all the entire film is saturated.
And there's also the story in the opening improvised dialogue. There's a story about these sex scenes where a guy. Well, one story Charlotte Gainsbourg talks of a guy in a sex scene
who came on her leg,
ejaculating on her leg, and she sort of feels sorry for him. We have literally all been there. And then Beatrice Dahl tells us a slightly more sinister story of like her being in the queue to a cinema, and some randy punk kind of pressing his Percy up against her,
and coming on her leg, and she also then talks about a film she was on where she was again burned as a witch in another film.
Yeah,
and she
it's about women being like. It's like thematically again, Noé thematically just fucking goes there.
But he goes there. But what he does is he salvages cinema out of it, I think. And he's not. I think what he's doing is pinpointing the culture wars, and he's saying this is, maybe there's a discussion to be had here because there's validity to a lot of validity to it, but it doesn't sink the ship. I suppose he's saying, he's saying art isn't easy, and he's making an ambiguous. And kind of, perhaps not. He's making an ambiguous statement via a unsubtle film, and kind of saying it can't really be anything more than that. And he's asking to like there should be a reprieve for film and a reprieve for difficult cinema, and a discomfort. Film is necessarily a form of discomfort for the actors and the directors. It is necessarily a kind of swirling vortex of egos, and it is a power dynamic. Inherently it is that, because it's not even, you could say even one photographer, there is a power dynamic. Of a photographer, whether he's walking around a bombed Bosnian village in 1994, or whether he's walking around a village sort of in the north during the election, lead up to 2019 election. There's a power vacuum of someone with a camera. When it's 100 or 200 people on set, or even 50 or 20, there's a power vacuum there as well, and he's acknowledging that. But he's also kind of saying the power vacuum is a problem. Someone needs to take charge. Someone needs to be, as Fassbinder says in the quote, a dictator. Yeah, says you need to be the dictator. And the thing is, there is no dictator in this film. There's lots of ambitions and pointlessness, but he's almost saying, but for the dictator who can step forward and kind of make sense of this, and there needs to be one strong, sensible voice, as it were, that commands this chaotic process, this flooding process. I think that's it. Maybe we're reading too much into it, maybe not. I think that is there. I think it's very consciously something he's tackling head on. But it's also a very beautiful film. Like the scenes of chaos, of everything falling apart, it's like the thick of it, but sped up out in French. It's really got a thick of it energy, which is the last, like Armando Iannucci's the last reference I think I'd pull on in this when talking about Gaspar Noé, but I think it really is, because it's got a real bleakness and humor to it. It's got a kind of slapstick element to it as well. It's really cleverly done. He kind of draws on all the tropes about film and all these very French tropes. The kind of the journalist, the kind of cineast journalist. Murphy is the young kind of eager, arrogant. Kind of debut filmmaker. It's all there, right? It's all in the mix, which is why I like it. It's turned me back on to Noé in like a bigger sense, like so it works. Well done, Gaspar.
And a bold fuck you to Baldy Bradshaw from The Guardian, who says self-parodic silliness from Gaspar Noé. Noé's mockumentary about a movie shoot gone horribly wrong goes horribly wrong.
But to read it as a mockumentary about a movie shoot gone wrong is completely misunderstand the stated avowed purpose of this film. Bradshaw is such a pussy, man. I think we should subject Bradshaw to the witches' trials. That's a parody, by the way. I'm not advocating violence against the Guardian's film reviewer du jour. Don't come
do a lot
me.
of genres, man. He's been in that job for fucking decades.
How though? I mean, he's saying on it, like, if I had the national platform to write pretty much a review of any film I wanted, the man can barely manage to squeeze out a paragraph or two. It's just shocking. He's
just quite a charmer, I think. But like, I mean,
I really just like it's everything I hate about like BFI, Sight and Sound, kind of South Bank cineast crassness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite fond of Sight and Sound. Although reading it, I was like, it's really. I mean, I'm really left wing, obviously, but like all the critics in Sight and Sound are like really left wing. Like every review I read was basically like assessing the politics of the film and kind of like
they do as a they are better, whereas someone like Mubi tends to focus on the aesthetics and the aesthetic significance of a film. If you read Notebook, for example, and sometimes social political background, but there's never like a conscious class analysis there.
I think Sight and Sound got scared of irrelevance and just went full woke. That's what I reckon.
Well, if they want to update their website and make it readable, then especially people with low
they don't care. They want you to pay for a subscription.
I don't want your fucking subscription, because people with low visual acuity would really appreciate a website that's just not like literally trying to read like a faded Victorian gravestone.
Oh yeah, because you're having trouble reading large review of my balls.
I'm having huge problems reading large review of your balls. I find it really interesting. I know we've kind of segued here, but I find it really interesting with the LRB, whose readership I would imagine skews a bit older. I know it's very popular with people in their 20s and 30s, but it's also very popular with people in their kind of 60s, 60s and 70s. It's like, no fucking way am I going to be able to read 0.5 size font when I'm 70. Is it like a Braille edition of fucking LRB? How big would that be?
Sending for the LRB here, man.
Yeah, I really am, man. But
it's a great bit.
It's a great bit. But yeah. No, I'm really glad we did this. Did you feel like do you feel he achieved whatever he set out to achieve? The kind of things we talked about?
I think so, but also, can I just caveat everything I'm saying by saying I don't love Gaspar Noé. I don't think I've ever loved a film by him. I always love the ambition and the spirit behind it. And then there's always something in a Gaspar Noé film where I'm just like, ugh, you didn't have to do it like that. With Irreversible, it's just like the way he exposes you to violence, I think it's overly sensational and indulgent, and it'd be more effective if certain things were implied. Because it's just not that I am squeamish, whatever, but it's more just that squeamishness becomes the distraction, it becomes the story. And I think in that kind of Cannes Film Festival persona non grata discourse, I think he's managed to make headway by turning his films into these kind of shock stories. And I sort of respect that hustle, but I think he's a good enough filmmaker that he could probably rise to the surface without that, and would be better if he did. But yeah, Enter the Void is my favourite. That is a really good film. It's good that he's there, being extreme, pushing the boundaries at all ends. I mean, I think that's what that's a good ambition. That's a great legacy.
Always be the best version of what they are. Sometimes they just need to be useful, to use his own word, or interesting efforts to kind of move the Overton window of like the film cinematic imagination. But it is it's true, like it's just kind of expanding the scope of what's possible, especially seeing as he kind of treads the line between art house and kind of mainstream cinema, because even though his films are avowedly art house, they have a bit wider distribution. Like Love had a kind of wider distribution, and so Enter the Void, like he kind of straddles the line, I think, and part maybe because they're French, and they, in France, I mean, every school child has watched every Jean-Luc Godard film by the time they're 10 or something. But maybe it's the seriousness that films are taken in France. Maybe that reflects that. But I feel like he straddles the line between kind of mainstream cinema and kind of art house cinema.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more, not now, but as we continue to pod, about just like what it means to like relate formally aesthetically to cinema's past and the politics of that. And like I think Lux Aeterna is like is a beautifully like non-judgmental statement on what the film industry is kind of like.
Yeah, and like a snapshot right now.
Yeah, and he's not trying to fight it or change it or celebrate it or condemn it. And he's also using its tools But I also think he has collaborators who are really on side. Like I think Charlotte Gainsbourg, she seems to be really on board with this like extreme style. That
I don't think she's an apparatchik. I think her presence in the film kind of lends it kind of gatekeeper, someone like it gives
she's
you
someone
Charon, the river boatman, who's going to take you over the sticks. That's what it gives you.
Yeah.
It gives you kind of like, it gives it that not just a veil of sincerity, but meaningful sincerity that she's committed to the project, and especially seeing as in the film she actually subjects herself to kind of a really uncomfortable experience, but she's making a point as well. I suppose she's saying, you can. Charlotte Gainsbourg as an actor has never shied away from exposing herself in film and putting herself in difficult situations. When you think about Nymphomaniac, which is a very would have been a very difficult film to shoot, just the demands it made physically on her, the kind of the nudity, the kind of terrible way that Lars von Trier lights all of his films,
the emotional exposure as well.
The emotional
I also
exposure,
think like there's maybe an element. I mean, Gaspar Noé has been perpetually fascinated by abuse, but more so role plays around power and sub-dom stuff and BDSM, and there's obviously a principle in S&M of the person who's the sub is the person who's really in control, because they're the one asking for it to all happen, and in a consensual scenario, and that little dialogue between Beatrice and Charlotte has this kind of erotically charged atmosphere of these women taking ownership of the industry and the scenario they work in and the chaos of it, and kind of that sort of story about feeling sorry for the guy who ejaculates on her leg has this like she sort of holds some power and some empathy and some in a way that only women can really.
Because they're admitting that the female body is a source of power that they hold over men, and they're not being shy about that. They're not saying, oh well, that's the kind of misogynistic view. I mean, it's true, because their bodies are in demand throughout the film, and are a subject of dissection and anatomy, and it kind of admits that reality. I actually, because we've been talking about, I saw a kind of read an interesting anecdote the other day, which was Michael Shannon, who's obviously appears in quite a lot of art house films here and there. He was talking about he was an anecdote about Philip Seymour Hoffman, and they briefly were on the same production together, stage production, and part of the set of this film was a hospital bed, and he said during one lunchtime he kind of hung around on the set and found Philip Seymour Hoffman kind of just laying on this hospital bed, kind of staring at the ceiling, and he's like, goes up to him, it's like, right, Phil, what's up? Philip Seymour Hoffman was like, man, one day you'll understand what it's like, because Michael Shannon's a bit younger in this, a bit less experienced. He's like, one day you'll be here and you'll be where I am. And there's this, he kind of, it's a bit of projection, but kind of Michael Shannon figures that, one thing he realizes that Philip Seymour Hoffman is under so much pressure, and this obviously kind of and foreshadows Philip Seymour Hoffman's death, I suppose, in a lot of ways. But the pressures that you are under as a filmmaker or actor, or sort of in that industry. So despite what we said about, it's quite a moving anecdote, but despite what we said about sort of film necessarily entails a bit of suffering and a bit of hardship and difficulty. Obviously, there are lots of people who are chewed up and spat out by that. I suppose it's the responsibility of like good filmmakers to be responsible and caring and supportive for the kind of productions they make,
to lend that suffering dignity.
To lend that suffering dignity, and to also make sure that actors just in a really like logistical housekeeping way just aren't suicidal or harassed in the bigger sense. It's one of those things where it's uniquely exposed. There's a very raw nerve with film.
That's the thing about like humility, actually, which I think is really important for directors. And as a principle for me as a director, I do a lot of acting classes. I hang out with actors in order to just never see myself as somehow above or separate from what they do, in the same way that I've been a DP, I've done held the boom, I've done all kinds of different things on a set. And I think that sort of humility, like when I watched that clip of Hannah Gadsby, I was so sort of irritated by that thing of where she says like, that when people in our marginalized group, like make jokes about ourselves, it's not humility, it's humiliation. It's like you decide how you look. The whole point of stand-up comedy is that you take control over how people perceive you, and that doesn't matter where you're from, who you are. You have to take responsibility for that. If you just leave responsibility to other people and just say, "Oh, it's all because I'm in a marginalized group," I don't know. It just doesn't. No. Anyway, I'm kind of getting big picture here.
You are getting big picture, but I think it's relevant because I think what the Hannah Gadsby thing is also saying is that
denies yourself agency, which is kind of the worst thing you can do to yourself.
Denies yourself agency, but also denies thousands of years of the power and the kind of truth, as it were, and the power of art to resolve and explore questions about human nature and identity. It's like suddenly, we've been doing this for thousands of years, but us right now, as of a few years ago, we suddenly decided that actually, stand-up comedy can't bear the brunt of these questions. Film can't bear the brunt of these questions. Books can't. So the only appropriate artistic medium is just to stand up on a stage or write an article which is telling your personal story, which is bullshit because it's
a fundamental misunderstanding of how truth functions in art.
Exactly. Because that is a kind of truth making as well. There is a platform there, but it also demolishes the foundations of thousands of years of exploration and difficult questions which art poses.
Social media has fucked people up, man.
It's made people fucking insane. It's completely made
mentally ill, literally. People don't understand the meaning. It's the same with like when like artists and like people like Lana Del Rey are being asked like what they think about Trump or whatever. It's like, well, you fucking retarded. Like you're like, why do you want an artist to tell you what's right or wrong? That's literally never been.
No. You want them to tell
of an artist.
You want them to speak or show or act in a particular way, but truth is not is not something that's separate from the kind of warp and weft of the form. You can't separate those things. It's not like you can extract the truth and protect it from the form. Like form and content, form and truth are completely intertwined with each other. And it's like, fuck you.
Yeah, and the truth is elusive. Like, otherwise it wouldn't be such a big deal.
No, absolutely not. Glad we resolved that.
I've got this slightly floaty feeling where I've been making big pronouncements, and I feel like I might be like in a bit of a manic phase.
Oh yeah, but, let's wind it back.
Let's just cool down. Let's have some chamomile tea. Thank you for listening, listeners.
Yeah. I'm gonna have a nice cold beer.
Next week we will be reviewing the work of Ulrich Seidel, the Austrian director. We will be reviewing Paradise Love and The Last Real Men.
Yes, bit of a double bill again.
Yeah, we like a double bill. Bit of juxtaposition.
Yeah, but thanks for joining us on this. We kind of went slightly off piste, but this intimate exploration of human nature and truth.
It's been real.
Really real. What was it?
Stay safe. Stay
Peace
home.
Out. Bye.
Cool. That was good.
Let me just. I don't know if I believe half of what I said there, but fuck it. I think when you're coming.